Cheers. Good morning. I am Hope, and I am so glad that you're here because we are talking about a whole bunch of books today. First, let's take a sip of coffee. And now, let's get into the books. I have a library haul. There are 16 books here, and my TBR kind of exploded. I talked about this very briefly in the mid-year book tag, that when I watch other people's mid-year book tags, I get a lot of books that sound really interesting, and a whole bunch of them came in. So we're going to talk about them today. We are also going to do a bit of an experiment with this one. I'm going to add up the total cost of these books because I'm always so curious when I see people with 30 book plus hauls. Like, how much money are you spending on books? I find that so fascinating. I wish I could be in that position. I am not, and that is okay. I'm also very okay with using my library. It is such an incredible resource. But I would love to know, this is free. I did not pay a cent for these except through property taxes, which I do pay. And I would love to know, what am I getting my money's worth in my property taxes? Spoiler, the answer is yes. I already know that I am, but how much would this book haul cost me if I went into Barnes & Noble and picked it up? I'm going to do a little experiment and see what that number would be. But let's just get into the book, shall we? We're going to start with The One Anomaly. This is an arc. I have To the Moon and Back by Eliana Rampage, and this is this a debut? I'm not sure it's a debut, but it's one young woman's relentless quest to become the first Cherokee astronaut will irrevocably alter the fates of the people she loves most. In this tour de force of a debut, it is a debut, about ambition, belonging, and family. This comes out in October, and I kind of thought it sounded interesting. What drew me to it was actually the title, To the Moon and Back, because I'm sure myself, along with a lot of other people, have the thing where I love you to the moon and back, and it just kind of drew me in, so decided I would give this a go. Astronauts seem to be making a comeback right now. That is also kind of an interesting trend to see in the publishing world. Let's talk about the two books I have here that I have in fact read. First, we have All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. This is a spectacular book, one of my favorite books of the year, I'll be honest. And in it, you're following Saint and Patch, and something pretty traumatic happens in the first quarter of the book with these two characters when they're very young, and then it follows the lives and what happens in the repercussions and the fallout of that traumatic event through the rest of the book. I was really interested because it's definitely mystery more than thriller. It's quite literary in its execution and its narrative style, but it still is quite a good page turner. And I think the relationship between Saint and Patch is fascinating, particularly the way it develops as they age, because you know that the feelings they have are not being explored the way maybe they think they should or could be explored. And I find that to be really interesting about the other people that come in and out of their lives and how they remain constant, and being in this small town and having this really big thing above them that they're trying to work through together because of how they experienced it differently. And it was so beautifully done. I have not read from Chris Whitaker before, but he wrote We Begin at the End, and I don't know much about that book, but it is absolutely now on my radar because of how much I absolutely adore this book. And then this author, I think he's going to destroy me emotionally. I read Us Against You by Friedrich Bachmann. It's the second book in the Beartown trilogy. I love this trilogy so freaking much, and there is something about the way Friedrich Bachmann writes that is both heart-wrenching and heartwarming at the same time. I can't even describe what this man can do to you emotionally as you're reading his books. And you're following a small town who is the whole town is quite obsessed with their hockey team. It's kind of like the one thing that brings them joy and happiness, the one thing that puts them on the map, because they're a very small, quite impoverished little town. And what happens when the hockey starts to break down because of a terrible event, which you find out about in book one, and then this is kind of the continuation of that. And then I have the book that I'm reading now, which is book 3, The Winners by Friedrich Bachmann. This thing got chunky real quick, and you are following the same sort of characters as the ramifications of this event continues to play out years later. You're being introduced to some new people. I don't want to say a whole lot because, like I said, it is book 3 in a trilogy and you just don't want to give too much away. But small town, hockey, literary, it's so freaking good. And if you want to cry, I highly recommend looking into this man's backlist. But anything he writes is going to seriously tug at those heartstrings. Also, I have picked up My Friends by Friedrich Bachmann. Last Bachmann on the list. I finally got this one from the library. It is a story of 3 friends. The world is full of miracles, but none greater than how far a young person can be carried by someone else's belief in them. And I think it has something to do with a painting and somebody trying to figure out the lives of these people that are in the painting or something like that. That's all I really know. It's Friedrich Bachmann. I don't need to know much more beyond that. I'm very much looking forward to reading this book. It is one that has a huge wait list, so I do need to get to that one sooner rather than later. Let's see, where else do we go? Well, actually, you know what? Let's take a break. I have a couple of nonfictions. One is Dinner for Vampires by, I keep going over here, but sorry, libraries put that plastic thing on and they're so shiny. Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lenz. I wasn't actually super keen to read this when it first came out, her memoir. I watched One Tree Hill like for the first couple seasons and then grew out of it. But I heard somebody recently talking about this book and just how good it was done. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. I haven't read a ton of nonfiction this year and would like to read a little bit more. Reading nonfiction is not something I put pressure on myself to do. But if something sounds kind of interesting, then I might as well give it a go. It's free from the library. And this is her memoir about how she was starring in this TV show that obviously has become quite the cult classic, but has experienced living with a cult. And it seems like it had quite a bit of control over her life to the point where she married somebody and had a child with them, I think. I'm interested to read this one. I thought about maybe getting it on audio. If you've read this, tell me if you read it physically or on audio and if the audio is worth it, because I can do nonfiction on audio, but I do have it here. We'll see if I pick it up. And then I have All Down Darkness Wide by Sean Hewitt. And this is his memoir. Is this his nonfiction debut? An ambitious memoir debut. I have never read from Sean Hewitt before, but I've heard very good things about his writing. But it's his memoir that seemed most intriguing to me. And I believe it's about him meeting a man, Elias. And it turns out Elias has a severe mental illness and kind of navigating a relationship with him while dealing with that. It sounded quite intriguing and decided to pick it up. If I like it, maybe I'll head to his fiction, but it's definitely his nonfiction book that most appealed to me as a reader. Let's keep going. The Adversary by Michael Crummy. The Adversary by Michael Crummy. This is a book that's located in Newfoundland, and it seems like it's a small town, and it's a searing novel about the corruption of power and the power of corruption. I'm not really sure. It seems like a man is marrying somebody to kind of cement his power over this town, but then something happens with an adversary. We'll see how this plays out. For me, the thing that was most intriguing is the fact that it's taking place in Newfoundland, which is on the east coast of Canada. And I don't know that I've read anything from Newfoundland before. That intrigued me. I'm not sure exactly what it's classified as. I think it's just fiction. I don't know if it's a genre specific, but it sounds really good, and it seems like there's going to be quite a bit of tension and atmosphere in this book. I'm excited to read this one. We have a historical fiction, which, as I also mentioned in my previous video, I am rediscovering how much I enjoy, and that is The Queen of Fives by Alex, again, sorry, went to the wrong side. The Queen of Fives by Alex Hay. And this is about a woman who is London's most talented con woman, and she needs to try to pull off a marriage to the most, she needs to trap an eligible duke and lift the fortune from the richest family in England. And I think that sounds really, really interesting. One that is kind of making the rounds right now, Hum by Helen Phillips. Books like this. So in this book, you're following a woman who undergoes a procedure so that she can't be detected under surveillance. And books like this start to give me kind of the heebie-jeebies a little bit because of how close to reality they kind of seem. It's like with big climate change books where they're dystopian light. Do you know what I mean? Dystopian adjacent. It's almost like you could see the world heading in this direction and it freaks you out. But then you think, but could the world actually head in that direction? I don't know. There's this weird gray area that makes me super uncomfortable in books like this. And so I was putting off reading this, but I've heard very good things about it and decided to finally pick it up. When it comes to books like this, people always compare it to the TV show Black Mirror. And I don't watch that show for the same reasons I just mentioned. There's just something about it that makes me wildly uncomfortable. Another book making the rounds right now is Julie Chan is Dead by Leanne Zhang. This is a thriller about a twin who is separated from her twin at birth. And then they kind of meet in like this viral video because the other twin is a successful influencer, but she ends up dead. And I guess this twin tries to take over her life, but things are not what they seem because obviously the other woman is dead. I'm not really sure exactly what to expect from this book, except that I've heard only good things about it, and it's a short one. I can't imagine it would take me too long to read. I could probably sit down and read this in about a day. So I'm excited to read this because thrillers seems unique, and thrillers can be hard to hit that unique button properly without it kind of getting a little too gimmicky. I'm very curious to see how this one goes. Blackwood's Blue Sky by Ewan Ivey. I have never read from this author before, but this book takes place, she was raised in Alaska and still lives there. Alaska is one of those places I want to see so flippin' badly. And this book takes place in Alaska, and it's about a woman and her daughter who move in with this man, and he is not exactly what he seems. It seems like there's a fairy tale retelling in this. It kind of reminds me of Beauty and the Beast, but I'm not sure if that's where it's going to go. We will see. But again, a book that I've heard people rave about and decided to pick up. I've heard of The Snow Child before, but I've never read it. I'm hoping I love this because then I'll head to The Snow Child if that is the case, particularly with the Alaskan atmosphere. I think how the setting of this book could be really interesting. A book that was on the Women's Prize for Fiction. It's not one that I read. I didn't read much of the Women's Prize for Fiction this year. There's a whole thing about that. But Nesting by Roshan O'Donnell is one that sounded really interesting to me, and I've finally been able to get my hands on it from the library. And in this, you are following a woman who, on a whim, picks up her children and a handful of clothes and leaves her husband, and kind of the fallout from doing so, and the systems in place that really make leaving abusive relationships challenging. So I'm curious to see how this one goes. I think it's probably going to be pretty upsetting, potentially. I'm hoping that there is a really good balance of hope and devastation and not just straight devastation. I'm reading enough devastation with Friedrich Bachmann. Thank you very much. So I'm looking forward to reading this because I've heard good things, and it's one of the few books off the Women's Prize long list that sounded really interesting to me. We have got 3 books left. We're getting there. Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young, another author I've heard really great things about but have never read from before. This is, I think, one of the few books in here that kind of is more in the fantasy realm, because I do believe there is magic in this. It's a deeply atmospheric story about ancestral magic, an unsolved murder, and a second chance at true love. So there's a woman named Emery who has the love of her life and her best friend, and then the love of her life is accused of murdering her best friend. And I guess this is a few years later where the town, something weird happens, something like all the trees change color overnight and fall is coming, and that hasn't happened in over a decade. And then August, who is the guy that she was in love with, returns to town. I'm not really sure exactly where this is going to go, but I'm very curious, and because I don't have a ton of fantasy on my list right now, I was definitely excited to pick this up because fantasy is one of my favorite genres, and I've an author that, again, if I was to love, I would have more books to pick up. The penultimate book, we have Long Island Compromise by Taffy Brodesser Aikner. And this is one that I have seen in bookstores all over the place. I haven't heard anybody talk about this one actually. This is just one that I wanted to pick up on my own, and it's a family kind of saga, family drama. And you're following somebody, a wealthy businessman, Carl, is kidnapped and returned a week later, and I guess the fallout from that, there's a lot of dealing with fallout of traumatic events in this pile of books. I guess the fallout from that really impacts the lives of his 3 children and his wife, and it goes from there and it follows them, I'm assuming, through the decades as it goes. I love a good family drama, and I think this one has the potential to deliver. And then the last book. This is a book that 2 years ago was all over the place. I think was one of the favorite books of like 90% of booktubers out there, and that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is not a book that I'm actually super excited to pick up. It's kind of going to be down at the bottom of this list, but I read Gabrielle Zevin for the first time. I read The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery earlier this year, and I loved it. I thought the writing was incredible, which is why I'm going to give this one a chance, hopefully. But in terms of the plot, it doesn't scream a book that I really, really want to read, but because I know how much I adored her storytelling and writing with the book I read by her earlier this year, I am going to give this one a go. However, like I said, for a lot of these books, there are wait lists, so they're going to be the priority. This one doesn't right now have a wait list, which means it'll be one that I get to when I get to, if I can get to it. But I want to give her a chance because I know how much people loved it, and I know how much I enjoyed the previous work I read by her. So we'll see how it goes. That is my library book haul. Now, let's do some math, which is not my forte, so I'm going to get a calculator. Okay. Are you ready for this? Books are so expensive too. I feel like some of these books are probably more expensive now than they are in here right now. And then when you look at the Canadian price, whew, like so many of these as hardcovers are $40 in Canada. That's crazy. I wonder if, so I know we have Barnes & Noble here, and in Canada they have Chapters or Indigo, and I wonder if they are still doing kind of their, you can still go in and get like 2 for $30, you know what I mean? Whereas Barnes & Noble does a lot of buy one, get one 50% off. I wonder if Chapters or Indigo is still doing that just to be able to incentivize people to come in, because holy pants, who can afford to buy this many books? So most of these so far have been $28 or $29 each. But like I said, I feel like prices are certainly going up right now. 30. Found the cheapest one so far, 26 for that one. And I don't know, there's no price on this, like what it might cost, so I'm just going to ignore that one. It's an ARC anyways. $431. 16 books, $431. That's crazy. So thank you very much to my library for sponsoring today's video. Because I absolutely could never do this without the library, and I think that obviously I'm not the only one in this situation, but this is just a appreciate the library, a library love post, because you just make my life a lot easier. So there you have it. Tell me what you're reading right now, what you're super excited about, what's the last library book you got out, and we can talk about it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.